Large-scale protests have been growing across the United States, with the demonstrators demanding a ceasefire. They're also calling for the government to stop sending arms to Israel and to put more pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to stop the bombardment of civilians. We're joined now by Sahar Khamis, Professor of Communication at University of Maryland, and she's joining us by Skype from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for your time. Is the U.S. president out of step with what Americans want? A new Data for Progress poll shows that 80% of Democrats, 56% of Republicans and 57% of independents believe the U.S. should call for a ceasefire.
Thank you so much for having me. There is definitely a growing sentiment here in the United States and also around the world to really save the lives of innocent civilians in Gaza, especially the children who are being killed day in and day out, the elderly, women, mothers shouting and screaming and yelling as their kids are being killed in front of their own eyes. These pictures are now circulating around the world, and social media is carrying them everywhere, and people can see these atrocities day in and day out. So there's a growing public opinion pressure here in the United States. Unfortunately, the Biden administration up till this moment did not seem to really respond in a way which is firm, decisive, strong, or satisfactory to meet these demands. You know, the calls for quote-unquote humanitarian pauses or tactical pauses, whatever it may be, does not rise to the level of responsibility which is needed, which is basically calling for an immediate ceasefire. That did not happen yet.
Well, President Biden did say a few days ago when the U.S. government announced what they're calling humanitarian pauses, these 4-hour pauses in fighting in Israeli attacks. He said that he asked Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for a ceasefire and that the Israeli government wouldn't agree to one. Is that good enough, given how many billions of dollars the U.S. government gives Israel, how much leverage it has with its ally?
Exactly. You hit the point very well. I mean, the United States does have leverage over Israel. It is the greatest supporter of the Israeli army, and a lot of our tax-paying money, our tax-paying dollars goes to supporting, a country which is now bombing and killing, fellow Muslims and Arabs in Gaza, which is completely unacceptable for a very large segment of the Arab/Muslim population, not just in the United States, but also around the world. So when the U.S. says, well, he is not listening, he is not responding, he doesn't really like the idea of the ceasefire, he wants all the hostages to be released first. This language does not, really fly well with a lot of people. They don't take it because they're like, is it that the U.S. cannot put pressure or it does not want to put pressure? You know what I'm saying? Like, is it about the ability to put pressure or about the decision not to put pressure? So there is really this kind of leverage which is not being used effectively or productively to put an end to all hostilities now and to save thousands of more lives, especially of innocent civilians and children.
And if it is that the U.S. administration of President Joe Biden, if it's that they do not want to put pressure, why is that?
I think that there has been an adopted line by the Biden administration from day one, since the beginning of Al-Aqsa flood events on October 7th, which is basically support for Israel, which seemed in many cases one-sided, very much just pro-Israel all the way through, in a way that did not please a lot of the Democrats, a lot of the even the supporters of Biden, who said, like, wait a minute, what is this kind of policy? Why are you being so one-sided to that extent? And of course, there were some pro-Israelis who really liked that, and they're cheering him up till this moment. But it seems to me like there is some kind of support for the Israeli ally in this particular case at the expense of human rights and international law. And there are now certain voices that say, wait a minute, if the U.S. continues this course of action, it's very likely gonna lose a very big part of its own international leadership and credibility and allies in the Middle East region as well as around the world. So there's gonna be definitely a big cost for this kind of U.S. policy, and it might be also a case of isolation for the United States and Israel and few Western allies on one hand and the rest of the world on the other hand.
And we know that there is pressure on the Biden administration to change course from Arab and Muslim allies. But what about the latest statements from the French President Emmanuel Macron, who said that there is no legality, no justification for killing civilians in Gaza? Just how much of a shift is that? Could hearing that from his French ally, from his Western ally, influence Joe Biden, do you think?
I'm glad that you raised this point, because just a moment ago I was saying it's going to be isolation for the US and Israel and Western allies, facing the rest of the world. Now it seems that this camp of Western allies is also starting to be fragmented. There is some kind of cessation from this particular camp. So when you see Emmanuel Macron using this language and saying, oh, stopping all hostilities now, and these are war crimes, that this is not acceptable, this is not legitimate, definitely that sends a message, and it sends an alarm bell to the Biden administration. Hey, it's not just about international public opinion. It's not just about people protesting in the streets. It's not just about Arab/Muslim nations. Even some of your own Western allies are starting to really stray away from this kind of policy and to say, hey, you really need to adopt a much stronger, clearer, more firm and more humanitarian policy now.
Ms. Khamis, it is great to get your expertise on the story. We really appreciate it. That is Sahar Khamis joining us live from Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much.